Lewis Hamilton is chasing a 19-year-old, and not just any 19-year-old, the one Mercedes picked to replace him. Kimi Antonelli took Hamilton's old seat, built a 50-point lead, and for half a season, it looked like the changing of the guard everyone predicted. Then Hamilton won in Barcelona, in a Ferrari nobody trusted, at 41 years old. Now 6 of the sport's living legends have looked at what is coming after the break. And the word they keep using about Hamilton is the one that should worry that kid the most. If you had walked through the paddock this spring and said the name Lewis Hamilton, you would have gotten the same look from almost everyone. A little sympathy, a slow nod, the kind of face people make when a great fighter has stayed one fight too long. One brutal first year at Ferrari, a car that fought him at every corner, and a teenager in his old Mercedes running away with everything. The story wrote itself. The old king had handed over the crown, and he had done it in the wrong colours. That was the read in April. It is not the read now. Because this week, Formula One did something it almost never does. It sat 6 of the greatest drivers who ever lived in front of a camera, one by one, and asked them to judge the season so far. Emerson Fittipaldi, Damon Hill, Gerhard Berger, Juan Pablo Montoya, Thierry Boutsen, Boutsen and Johansson. Between them, world titles, dozens of race wins, decades inside this sport. These are not pundits filling airtime. These are men who have actually done the thing they are being asked about. And when the conversation turned to Hamilton, every single one of them said a version of the same thing. He is back. And the timing of it could not be worse for the driver in front. The math still says Hamilton is second. He sits on 169 points after 11 rounds, 50 behind Antonelli, with 11 races still to run. On paper, that is a mountain. It gets steeper when you look at the teams, because Mercedes are not just leading the Drivers' Championship, they are running away with the Constructors' title too. Well clear of Ferrari. So the legends were not staring at a man in the best car on the grid, cleaning up. They were staring at something more interesting. A driver dragging more out of his machinery than it should give, at an age when everyone assumed the opposite would happen. To understand why the tone shifted so hard, you only have to look at one afternoon in June. For 686 days, Lewis Hamilton had not won a Formula One race. That is not a slump. That is the longest drought of his entire career. The kind of number that follows a driver quietly into retirement. And then, in Barcelona, in a red car half the grid had written off, he ended it. He was 41 years old. He became the oldest man to win a Grand Prix since 1970, the first time in more than half a century. Anyone that age had stood on the top step. On the podium beside him stood 2 more British drivers, the first all-British podium the sport had seen since 1968. It was the kind of afternoon that makes even neutral fans stop and remember why this man is called the greatest of his generation. And 4 laps from the end of that same race, the teenager leading the championship pulled off the track and parked it. Boutsen and Johansson watched that win and did not hesitate. He called it a classic Lewis Hamilton victory. The mark of a champion, he said. The kind of driver who can take a 2% opportunity and make it happen. Think about what he is really saying there. Not that Hamilton had the fastest car. Not that it fell into his lap. That when a sliver of a chance opened up, Hamilton was the one man on the grid ruthless enough to grab it with both hands. That is not a compliment you hand a driver who is finished. And Johansson did not stop at the win. The championship, he said, is far from over. And there is a reason that line lands so hard. A title this year would not just be another trophy on the shelf for Hamilton. He already holds a share of the record for the most drivers' championships in history. One more from here. At 41, in a Ferrari, against the very kid who replaced him, would be the 8th. It would put him alone at the top of a mountain nobody else has ever climbed. That is the prize sitting quietly behind this whole charge, and every driver on that panel knows exactly what it would mean. So why did a man everyone buried in the spring suddenly look like a threat again? Part of the answer sits in the car underneath him, and part of it is the whole season changing shape. Fittipaldi put it bluntly. Last year, he said, everybody criticized Lewis. He cannot beat Leclerc. He is too old. Fittipaldi heard all of it. And now, in his words, Hamilton is going strong. The 2-time world champion sounded almost relieved to say it out loud. He was so happy, he said, to see Lewis and Ferrari going fast again. But Fittipaldi added something sharper, something that matters for everything still to come. This year, the sport tore up its rulebook and started again. Smaller cars, lighter cars, a completely new power unit that leans far harder on its electric side than anything before it. Less grip, less downforce. And a car with less downforce rewards exactly the thing Hamilton has always had more of than almost anyone. Car control, feel. The ability to catch a machine that is sliding underneath him and carry speed through it anyway. For a decade, the sport handed everyone enormous grip and made cars easier to drive right on the limit. This season, it took a chunk of that away, and it turned out that a lot of the field had been leaning on that grip without knowing it. Fittipaldi thinks that reset quietly moved the ground back under Hamilton's feet, back toward the kind of driving that made him a champion in the first place. It is worth sitting on how big this change actually was. These are the deepest rule changes the sport has seen in a generation. The cars shed weight, gave up a slice of their downforce, and switched to a power unit where the electric side now does almost half the work, nearly 3 times what it used to. Overnight, an entire grid of drivers had to relearn how to be fast. Some of them never fully adjusted. Hamilton, on the evidence of the last few months, adjusted better than almost anyone expected, and a great deal better than a 41-year-old was supposed to. Berger saw the same shift. He was very happy for Lewis, he said, because it had been so difficult for him. And now, in Berger's words, it looks like he is coming out of the corner a bit. Coming out of the corner. From a 10-time Grand Prix winner, that is not small talk. That is a man who knows exactly how these things turn. What makes the charge more impressive, not less, is the car itself. Ferrari are not handing Hamilton a rocket. On raw straight-line speed, the red car has been down on the very best this year, and Hamilton himself has admitted to losing a few tenths a lap purely on power down the longest straights. That is a real deficit. On some tracks, it is the difference between a win and a distant fourth. So when the legends talk about Hamilton flying, they are not describing a man in the class of the field. They are describing a man beating a car that is not quite good enough on skill and racecraft over and over, which is precisely why it frightens them on Antonelli's behalf. Imagine what he does when Ferrari finally close that gap. And there is one more thing that makes this whole fight sting. The kid in front is not a stranger to Hamilton. He is his replacement. When Hamilton left for Ferrari, Mercedes handed his seat to Kimi Antonelli, the teenager they had been grooming for years. Hamilton praised him, championed him, told the world the boy was special. Antonelli, for his part, kept insisting he wanted to make his own story, that it was not right to see him as anyone's replacement. He wanted to be Kimi, not the next Lewis. The problem is the story wrote a twist neither of them planned for. The mentor did not fade off into the sunset. He switched teams, sat through one miserable year, and came out the other side hunting the very driver who took his old car. There was even a moment at Monaco earlier in the season where Hamilton reportedly told Antonelli he was catching up to him. Back then, it sounded like a veteran being generous to a rising star. Read it again now, with Hamilton charging and 6 legends lining up behind him, and it sounds like something else entirely. And it is not only Hamilton carrying the weight of this. Ferrari have not won a Drivers' Championship since 2007, a drought that has now dragged on for the better part of 2 decades. A whole generation of tifosi has grown up watching the most famous name in motorsport come close and fall short, season after season. Hamilton did not cross over to Ferrari to finish second to a teenager in his old car. He went there to end that drought and write the last great chapter of his career in red. That is the story the legends can feel building underneath the numbers, and it is why they will not let it go. This is where the panel stopped sounding like fans and started sounding like a warning. Damon Hill took the season and looked straight past the summer break. What is coming, he said, is a decider, a tipping point. And the pressure, in his words, is going to be huge. Hill was not describing a comfortable cruise to the flag. He was describing the whole fight bending toward the man who thrives when the pressure climbs. Because Hill knows what Hamilton is made of, and he did not dress it up. Cream always rises to the top, he said. And then the line that travelled around the paddock all week. You cut Lewis Hamilton in half, Hill said, and it just says, competitor, right the way through. That is the read from a world champion who raced against the best of his own era, not nostalgia. A cold assessment of what a cornered Hamilton actually does. Hamilton himself is saying the quiet part out loud. Still, a lot of work to do, he admits. Still a mountain to climb in the second half of the season. But then, the part that should travel. He is more focused than ever, he says, and he really believes he can fight. And this, he points out, is usually where his seasons get stronger. The back half has always been his territory. Look at the shape of his career, and he is not wrong. Time and again, Hamilton has left the break as a different animal, stringing together the runs that decided championships. The man chasing 50 points is the same man who has made up bigger gaps than this, in cars that were not always the best on the grid. Notice too, who is not in this conversation anymore. At the start of the year, this looked like it might be a 5 or 6 car scrap for the title. It is not anymore. Leclerc, Norris, Verstappen, one by one they have slipped off the pace of the 2 Mercedes and the one charging Ferrari. The field has quietly narrowed to a single storyline, the prodigy out front and the veteran hunting him down. Everyone else is now racing for the leftovers, which means the only man on the grid with a realistic shot at stopping Antonelli is the exact one the legends just spent a week praising. If this breakdown is giving you the full picture, the broadcast skip, subscribe. This channel takes apart the telemetry and the strategy behind every race in this title fight, every single week. So the real question from here is a simple one. Who is actually standing between Hamilton and this championship? And can he take the heat? The honest answer is that Antonelli has been, for most of the year, genuinely brilliant. And pretending otherwise would insult anyone watching. He has won 6 races in 2026. 5 of them came in a row, from China all the way through Monaco, a streak that made him the youngest driver ever to lead a Formula One championship and the youngest ever to win at Monaco. He grabbed pole in China as the youngest pole sitter the sport had ever seen. He took Hamilton's old seat and did not just fill it, he set it alight. If he holds on, he breaks a record that has stood for over a decade, becoming the youngest world champion the sport has ever produced, younger even than Sebastian Vettel was. Every one of them sees the talent clearly. Fittipaldi says the boy is doing a fantastic job, that at 19 he can win the championship. Montoya, never a man to hand out praise cheaply, calls him bloody quick. Nobody on that panel is pretending Antonelli is a fluke. But Boutsen slipped in a detail that is easy to miss. Antonelli, he said, is very aggressive right now, and in 3 or 4 years he will drive very differently. It sounds like a throwaway line. It is not. What Boutsen is describing is a young driver, still running on raw instinct, still learning where the edge actually is. That works beautifully when you are winning and loose and free. It is a very different thing when the walls close in. And there is a version of this fight that never comes down to raw pace at all. If these two end up side by side, wheel to wheel, into a braking zone with a championship riding on it, one of them has lived that exact moment 100 times. The other has never done it once with this much at stake. Hamilton has spent 20 years winning the duels where nerve matters more than horsepower. That experience does not show up in a qualifying lap. It shows up on the Sunday afternoons that actually decide titles. Because this is the question none of them can truly answer for him. What happens when the pressure actually lands? For all 6 wins, Antonelli has never once lost a title fight. Not because he keeps winning them, because he has never been in one. He has never driven the second half of a season with a 50-point lead and the greatest driver of his generation growing in his mirrors, race after race, refusing to go away. That is a very specific kind of heat, and nobody in that car has felt it before. Pressure does strange things to young drivers. It is not that they suddenly forget how to drive, it is that the margins shrink. The overtake you would normally take, you leave. The corner you would normally attack, you protect. And the moment a driver starts guarding a lead instead of extending it, the man behind can smell it from half a straight away. Every great champion has a story about the season. The pressure broke someone in front of them. Antonelli has never once been on the wrong side of that story. He is about to learn which kind of driver he really is. The cracks have already flickered once. Go back to Barcelona, the same afternoon Hamilton ended his drought. Antonelli was running inside the fight, and then, with 4 laps to go, it was gone. A retirement, on the one weekend where his main rival stood on the top step. In a season where he had barely put a wheel wrong, the timing of that failure was almost too cruel. He had led every step of the way. He had not yet learned what it feels like to be the one being hunted. And it is not only Hamilton doing the hunting. Antonelli's own teammate is the other problem in the garage. George Russell opened this season by winning in Australia, then won again in Austria. And for a stretch, it was Russell, not Antonelli, who looked like the Mercedes #1. Berger said Russell had a wake-up call from Antonelli. But that door swings both ways. A teammate who has already got the better of you this year is a teammate who knows he can do it again. Montoya thinks that is the real pressure point. If Russell can find a way to match Kimi, he said, it could push the kid into an uncomfortable place, into mistakes. Damon Hill made the same point with a memory of his own. He compared it to a young Jacques Villeneuve arriving at Williams next to him, and then pointed out, with a grin, that the way that one ended was Hill finishing ahead of Villeneuve. So Russell, he said, has to find a way to do the same thing now. And Boutsen, watching Russell scuffle through a rough patch, simply said George will be back. Now, in fairness, this is not a clean one-way story, and treating it like one would be dishonest. Hamilton has handed points back this year too. A run of penalties before the break, including a pit lane speeding penalty in Hungary for going a whisker over the limit, cost him a stronger result and stretched Antonelli's lead from 45 points out to 50. If you were wondering how a tenth of a kilometre an hour ends up costing a man a podium, so is he. For Hamilton to climb this mountain, those sloppy weekends have to stop, and he knows it better than anyone. But strip it all back, and the trend is the one the legends fixed on. The kid is starting to feel it. The old champion is starting to fly. So everything now points at one date. In 3 weeks, the season restarts at Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix, and it is a sprint weekend, which means extra points on the table and more chances for that 50-point gap to move in a single afternoon. For a driver doing the chasing, a sprint weekend is a gift. 2 bites at the apple, not one. It is also the last time the sport will ever race at Zandvoort, which loads the whole day with even more weight. This is the moment the legends were really talking about. Not the 11 rounds behind us, the 11 ahead. Fittipaldi called the rest of the year a dice, a roll that could still land either way, and said he really hopes Lewis challenges for this championship. Coming from a man who has watched every great driver of the last 50 years come and go, that is not a throwaway line. The car should suit Hamilton more from here, on the kind of circuits where feel matters more than raw straight-line grunt. The Zandvoort format hands him extra points to hunt. The history of his own career says the back half is where he does his damage. And the teenager in front has never once had to defend anything from anyone, let alone from this. And that is the part the numbers hide. 50 points sounds enormous in the middle of the summer. It is 2 race wins. 2 Sundays where Hamilton finishes in front and one thing goes wrong for the car ahead of him. And suddenly, this is a straight fight with 9 rounds to run. The legends can count. That is exactly why not one of them was willing to call this thing over. Thierry Boutsen did not overthink it. Lewis is Lewis, he said. He deserves to be on top. And then the line that tells you how these drivers really see him. As soon as the car gets better, Boutsen said, Hamilton makes it happen. He won in Barcelona the moment the machine came to him. The message underneath is blunt. Give this man a car that works, and he does the rest himself. That is the word the whole panel kept circling, the one running under everything from the very start. Not old, not finished, dangerous. Each of them, in their own way, described a driver you do not want to see filling your mirrors in the second half of a season. Fittipaldi hoping he challenges, Hill calling him competitor to the core, Johansson calling Barcelona the mark of a champion. Berger watching him come out of the corner, Boutsen saying he belongs on top. 6 separate conversations, 1 shared conclusion. And that is exactly the problem for a 19-year-old holding a lead for the first time in his life. It is one thing to build a 50-point gap when nobody is truly chasing you. It is another thing entirely to hold it when the man behind you is the one the greatest drivers alive just spent a week quietly warning you about. So the real question is not whether Hamilton is fast enough anymore. 6 world champions just answered that one for you. The real question is the one only 11 races can settle. When the pressure finally lands on a teenager who has never felt it, and the man applying it has felt almost nothing else his entire career, which one of them blinks first? We find out at Zandvoort in 3 weeks. And this time, nobody is writing Hamilton's ending for him.